Hey folks, and welcome back to the Iron Sysadmin Technology News recap for the week of August 17th. 17th? 17th. So, it's been a minute, folks. I had some travel for work, did not have a chance to record last week or the week before because I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, and then I was in Orlando, Florida for a day, right on the day that I would have recorded this. So, here I am back. Sorry I've been missing. So what I've done is I've actually taken news from the past 3 weeks and picked out the ones that I thought were worth talking about. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first and foremost, I am recording this on the end of Windows 10 week. So on the 15th of October, Microsoft has finally ended support for Windows 10. Now, that doesn't mean you can't buy security fixes. There is an extended security updates service that you can buy, and from what I saw, it's about $30 for the year, but it only buys you 1 year. And at the end of that year, you're back in the boat you're in today. So, if you absolutely do not want to move to Windows 11, I'm going to tell you this, I don't blame you. Then you can buy that extension, but you're going to have to move eventually. Windows 10 will eventually end support. Even if they do extend it again after that, it's not going to be around forever. But I know that there are a lot of folks that do not have hardware that will support Windows 11, or other folks who don't want to move to Windows 11 for other concerns, like privacy, or the fact that AI has been crammed into everything with Copilot, or maybe you don't like the ads that Windows shows you, and I gotta be honest, it's a bit frustrating. I use Windows 11 as little as possible on my machine, and that's mainly to edit these videos and play VR. Otherwise, I do everything on top of Fedora. So, if you want to explore a new operating system, I highly recommend Linux. I honestly do, because one of the main requirements for Windows 11 is not a hard stop for Linux. Now, I do recommend that most machines do have a trusted platform module, and you do turn it on, and you do use Secure Boot to protect your machine. But if you have an older machine that serves your needs, I really don't see a reason to force you to turn on to use a TPM, which is exactly what Windows 11 is doing. Linux doesn't have that requirement, at least not right now. So I highly recommend it. If you don't have a requirement for something that absolutely needs to run Windows, then try Linux. I have some videos on this channel about installing Fedora, both the normal Fedora standard distribution and the Bazite spin, which is more of a gaming build of Fedora, which has its own nuances, but would probably be better if your primary use case for your machine is gaming. But if you don't want to run Fedora, there are a bunch of other options out there, and there are other channels that are covering all kinds of ways, all kinds of distributions of Linux that maybe you want to check out. Okay, enough on that. First article I would like to cover on today's show, other than the end of Windows 10, which, man, what a sad day. I've been helping my dad through how to get his older machine, two of them actually, how to figure out what to do with them, and I think one of them he's going to have to replace because he wants to stick with Windows, and the other we think maybe we can get him up to Windows 11, but man, what a nightmare. Anyway, okay, first article for today. This comes from Bleeping Computer. The F-droid project is threatened by Google's new dev registration rules. Now, if you're familiar with the Apple ecosystem, you'll know that every application that you install on your iPhone has to come from the Apple App Store. And to get into the Apple App Store, it has to go through the checks and balances that Apple puts an application through. One of those is it has to be signed by a registered and validated developer. And this is all in the effort of protecting you. Now, I don't love it on the iPhone. I do use an iPhone, but I don't love how closed the ecosystem feels, how I cannot sideload an application if I chose to. I can't run an alternate operating system if I chose to. I am stuck with what Apple has approved to put in front of my eyes. And they have some weird rules around things like content, around things like what those developers have to pay in order to be listed on the App Store. And to be honest, it's not very open. Android has always been sort of the last bastion of free and open software on a mobile platform. Obviously, a couple weeks ago, I talked about that Linux phone, and if that takes off, maybe this is an answer. But at the moment, that isn't really a viable option. And if you're going to be using a normal commodity cell phone, It's going to be on Android or it's going to be on iOS. Well, Android always allows you to turn off the requirement for signed packages, which allows you to sideload packages onto your machine or onto your phone. And what F-droid is, long way around here, what F-droid is a app store, essentially an alternative app store that does not require their developers to identify themselves in a way that Google would see fit to sign their applications. Many of these developers don't like Google. They like the platform Android, but they do not like dealing with Google as, the entity that they are. And to be honest, I don't blame them. Google has done some pretty evil things over the years, and well, let's be honest, they're here to make money. And these applications are more like side projects, or they are alternatives to some of the mainstream applications. Well, what Google is trying to force on the Android platform is that every application that gets installed, including those installed through third-party app stores like F-droid, would have to be signed by a developer by Google. So signed by a verified developer that is verified through Google. Now, this will effectively kill F-droid. F-droid doesn't make this software. They can't claim that it's theirs. They can't sign it as themselves. And they say that asking the developers that publish through F-droid to have Google sign their packages is just a non-starter for a lot of these folks. So F-droid could be in some trouble here. You may not be able to run this on a normal Android device, which is kind of sad. Maybe that just means we're all going to have to turn to third-party Android ROMs now. I don't know. I guess we'll see how this pans out. All right, on to our next article for today. So this comes from Yahoo. North Korean hackers target crypto devs through open source software hub. This is another attack on the NPM software repository. And in this case, what these attackers are doing is I guess you call it typo squatting. They're publishing applications under common misspellings of other very popular modules and applications that you'd be installing from NPM. And they're packing them with a cryptographic payload, I should say an encrypted payload, which will go and grab malicious code and put it into your application or onto your machine. And what the malicious software is meant to do is to do things like find and steal crypto wallets and their keys. So, kind of bad stuff. Another attack on NPM, which is kind of sad. Unfortunately, this seems to be a common thing for folks to do, or for the bad guys to be doing at the moment, and that is these supply chain attacks. So you may want to read through this article if you're using NPM to back some of your applications. Go make sure that you're not using any of the affected modules, and double check your code. All right, on to some more light-hearted news. It's been kind of heavy today. This is actually a post on Reddit, which links a video. Gaming on Linux gets good. I've been saying this for quite a while, I feel. So gaming on Linux has really come a really long way. And to be honest, I watched this guy's video so that I could have a better idea as to what to tell you about his video. And I don't love his narration style, but I encourage you to go check it out. He's not normally a Linux user. He doesn't have Linux on his main machine. He said because he has to use his machine for work. But he did install Linux on a machine in order just to try out some games. And he tried things like Cyberpunk 2077. He had one of the God of War games, I think, that I saw in his video. He also had a Spider-Man game and even some retro emulation. And the whole point was that he wanted to show his audience that gaming on Linux is actually a lot better than it used to be. Now, he made a couple of slips because he just isn't as familiar with Linux as some of us might be, and I think some of the things that he said were a little problematic or a little difficult are actually easier than he thought, only because he just didn't know the workarounds or didn't know the sort of nuance. But I urge you to go check out the video if you're curious about gaming on Linux. As I mentioned earlier in today's video, with that end of Windows 10, maybe you're thinking about, what do I do with my gaming rig because I don't want to go to Windows 11? A distribution like Bazite or Nobara, or there was another one that came out recently that I can't remember the name of. There are plenty of gaming spins of Linux that are made specifically to make it easy for you to go get your Steam games running on a Linux machine. The real crux of what's improved gaming on Linux is Proton and the Steam Deck. So the Steam Deck is able to play Windows games even though it runs Linux because of a compatibility layer called Proton. Most Linux distributions can run Steam games because they can run Proton, right? Also, Steam has a surprising number of games that are written to work natively on Linux. In fact, a lot of game studios, which we're going to talk about in just a minute as well, are taking their Windows games and porting them to Linux, or they're taking their Windows games and optimizing them to run better through Proton so they can run on the Steam Deck. And everybody that runs a Linux machine can benefit from that. So gaming on Linux really has come a long way. We can thank Valve and Proton for a lot of that. But honestly, the communities that have been fighting to get gaming on Linux to become a real thing for so long should be able to take a lot of credit there as well. Okay, our next article comes from Gaming on Linux. Surprise, this is our gaming section, I suppose. Doom Dark Ages gets a major performance upgrade for handhelds, now Steam Deck verified. Now, I didn't delve into all the minutiae of this particular article, mainly because I don't have the game Doom Dark Ages yet. Even though I do want it, I just have trouble spending that much money on a game. I'll wait till it comes down on price. So Doom Dark Ages is the latest edition of the Doom series of games, and I hear it is quite good. There have been some changes made on the performance level so that it can run better on the Steam Deck, which means it can run better on Linux in general. Now, like I said, I didn't delve too deeply into the specifications, although they are here in the article here. You can see some of the improvements on the Steam Deck, 720p, around 30 frames per second. Not too bad. I do not know if this game is Linux native or if it uses Proton to run, harkening back to my previous comments about Proton versus native Linux gaming. But the point is that it runs, and the game studio has put effort into making it run better on Linux, and that's a good thing. When you think about news from places like Electronic Arts gimping their games intentionally so that they cannot run on Linux because they think all Linux users must be hackers and cheaters, it's great to see game companies actually embracing Linux instead of trying to intentionally turn their back on an entire operating system full of folks that just want to play games. Okay, our next article is from The Verge. Mastodon snags Blue Sky's starter packs feature and includes the ability to opt out. A new packs feature will help you fill up your feed on Mastodon. Now, let me level with you here. Mastodon has a problem. It has an adoption problem, okay? People log into Mastodon, or they try to find a server. They want to switch from something like X or Blue Sky or Facebook, and they want to go to Mastodon because they've heard about it from maybe a friend or just because they heard about it in the media, and they don't know where to start. So they go to try to set up an account, and they have to pick a server, and that's kind of confusing because they've never had to pick a server on any other platform ever. So Mastodon has done some work to sort of give you a default server to join, which you could argue is good or bad based on how that particular network is designed to work, because the whole idea of a federated social network is that you do not have a default server, and you can go set your particular account up wherever you want, including your own hosted solution, which is what I do. But so they sort of solved that problem, made that a little bit easier for onboarding. But another big problem is once you set up an account and you log in, unless you already know people that are on Mastodon, your feed is very empty, because there's no outrage algorithm that is forcing content at you. You have to go and find people to follow. So one of the solutions that the Mastodon project has proposed here is this idea of packs. Now, what a pack is basically lists of users, from what I understand from the article here. But the list of users is published, and they're going to be themed in a way that says, oh, I would like to follow, I don't know, podcasters. So there would be a podcasters pack, and inside of there would be a bunch of podcasters. Maybe you want to follow a bunch of Linux nuts, and in that pack you'd find folks like me, or you'd find influencers that talk about Linux, or you'd find maybe developers that work on the Linux kernel. So you're interested in Linux, you follow the Linux pack. But the other cool thing about this, because apparently Blue Sky has something like this they call starter packs, which is, again, a way for people to discover folks on that platform. I guess on Blue Sky, when you join or when you're added to one of those packs, you don't have a way to remove yourself. You're there. And the only way to take yourself out would be to actually report or block the user that added you, which is a little counterintuitive if you ask me. Now, I don't know. Maybe that's not exactly the only way to get it done. Maybe they're working to improve the feature, but the cool thing is that Mastodon does two things, or I should say Mastodon is planned to do two things, because this is something that's not in the main branch yet. First, you'll be notified when you're added to one of these packs. So if me as a Linux influencer was added to a Linux influencers pack and I'm like, no, I don't want to be known as a Linux influencer, take me out of there. I will not only be notified, but then I can remove myself from that pack if I'd like to. Maybe you're added to a pack of things you don't want to be associated with. Maybe, you've been added to a bunch of bronies and you don't want to be a brony. So you want to remove yourself from that pack. So I think this is a great way to help solve the lack of outrage algorithm, quote unquote, problem, because it does give you sort of an empty timeline because you don't have anything feeding you content. But they're really solving it in a Mastodon way, which is completely optional and completely something you can opt out of. So I think it's a pretty cool idea, and I can't wait to see it hit the actual mainline branches that end up on people's instances. Okay, our next article is actually from Tech Policy Press. Okay, and this is less of an article, more of a podcast, which I unfortunately did not have the chance to listen to the entire thing. So this is more of a recommendation than a recap. But I will tell you the gist of what I was able to hear from listening to this podcast earlier today. It is, the open internet is dead. What comes next? And it's an interview with a woman who wrote an article about her opinions on how the open internet has just been turned into this husk of its former self. That's been basically overrun by corporate entities that are all about stealing your data and turning a profit on your browsing habits. I can't say I can disagree with that. But ostensibly, what the podcast interview leads to is kind of not just where we are, but how we got here. And the little bit that I had heard of it was talking about some things that happened under the Clinton era in the 90s when the internet was first getting into people's homes. And I'm hoping that the story goes a lot further than that because I'm really interested in sort of how this unfolded. And I'm also hoping that it leads into what do we do about it? Let's not just talk about the problem. Let's talk about solutions. So again, I can't tell you if that's where this goes, but I encourage you to at least go check out the transcript, which is in the link in the description of today's video. And if you really want to, go listen to the podcast interview, which is about 49 minutes, according to the player that's listed right here in the article. But go check it out. Let me know what you think of it. I'm definitely going to go listen to it. All right, and that is it for today's episode. I hope you all have enjoyed, and please be sure to like and subscribe if you like what I'm doing here. And remember to tune in next week. I don't have any more travel planned, so hopefully we'll be back to weekly on these things. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.